The corridors had been silent for hours before anyone outside those walls understood what was happening. No cameras captured the moment. No royal correspondent received a call. The staff who witnessed it were instructed, in language that left no room for interpretation, that what they had seen would remain within those rooms indefinitely. And yet by the time London's grey dawn pressed against the palace windows, the most consequential internal restructuring in the modern history of the British Crown was already complete. A family had been severed from everything they had spent years accumulating. A woman who had risen to the pinnacle of royal life had been reduced to a single word of surrender, and the man who had orchestrated every moment of it had done so not as a future king, but as something rarer and more dangerous. He had done it as a son who finally knew the truth. This is not assembled from rumour or speculation. What follows is drawn from financial documentation, verified testimony, and intelligence intercepts whose existence the palace has neither confirmed nor denied. Prince William did not arrive at this moment through impulse or grief. He arrived through months of meticulous, hidden preparation that those around him mistook for quiet acceptance. It was not acceptance, it was construction. And what he built inside a sealed facility beneath Kensington Palace was the most legally airtight case ever assembled against a member of the royal household. The question that unlocks all of it is not what he found. The question is what he did the moment he realized how deep it went. It started with a number that should not have existed. A single disbursement of £2.88 million, routed through what the records described as an environmental land restoration initiative. On every surface, the payment was unremarkable. It bore the correct administrative markings and passed through the appropriate approval channels. The forensic accountant who pulled the thread did not expect it to unravel anything significant. Within 72 hours, she was operating under classified protocols she had not used since dismantling a £2 billion Russian laundering network. The conservation body was a shell registered in Jersey. Behind it sat a trust, and controlling that trust was a name that transformed a financial irregularity into something else entirely. Tom Parker Bowles had not stumbled into this arrangement. He had been positioned there. William had not trusted the discovery to palace channels. The team he assembled operated without any connection to the formal royal administrative structure, installed inside a secured basement workspace at Kensington Palace, with no external network access and no permitted personal devices. He had not constructed this isolation out of excessive caution. He had constructed it because the earliest indicators suggested that whatever had been built around King Charles ran through people positioned close enough to the crown to monitor what the crown was doing. So the investigation remained invisible, and what it found was not the opportunism of individuals exploiting proximity to wealth. What emerged was a deliberate architecture, layered across years, and engineered by people who understood institutional systems well enough to weaponize them. 5 categories of royal expenditure had been quietly compromised: estate upkeep, ceremonial spending, specialist procurement, charitable disbursement, and event coordination. Individually, not one payment warranted a second look. Mapped together across 5 years of records, they told a story that could not be argued away. The funds had been systematically redirected through a web of offshore vehicles registered across the Isle of Man, Jersey, and the British Virgin Islands, and beneath every surface transaction, the money travelled toward the same destination. Accounts that ultimately served the financial interests of Camilla's children. Tom Parker Bowles had positioned his commercial network as the Crown's primary supplier for premium food and hospitality. Scottish salmon billed at 3 times its market value. Wine priced at £2,000 per bottle against an acquisition cost of £500. Floral arrangements invoiced at quadruple the standard rate. His sister Laura Lopes had constructed a parallel revenue stream through advisory services, charging hundreds of thousands for crisis management during periods when no crisis had occurred, and tens of thousands for media consultations that amounted to a single written exchange. In the most damning category, event production invoices cross-checked against official court records revealed that a substantial portion of the events submitted for payment had never taken place. The total drawn through these mechanisms approached £45 million, and William's team had not yet reached the protected reserve. The Crown's special fund was not publicly known. It existed as a protected capital reserve, maintained for institutional emergencies and deliberately insulated from standard auditing. At its centre sat one protective requirement built for a single purpose: Every withdrawal required dual authorization, the keeper of the privy purse and the monarch himself. That safeguard was supposed to make what William discovered impossible. It had not made it impossible. It had made it slower. The analyst assigned to the special fund applied signature verification software to every withdrawal authorization across the 5-year window. A signature produced by an attentive individual registers between 95 and 98% consistency. The authorizations for the largest withdrawals, amounts ranging from £500,000 to £3 million, returned scores between 40 and 70%. These were not the marks of an exhausted man. These were the tracings of hands operating under compromised neurological function. When those authorization dates were cross-referenced with the king's private medical calendar, the room went still. Every high-value fraudulent authorization had been executed during a window of documented medical vulnerability. Chemotherapy dates, post-surgical recovery intervals, the specific hours following medication that reduced cognitive processing and stripped away the capacity to scrutinize any document with meaningful awareness. Someone had accessed his medical schedule. Someone had mapped those windows and arranged for specific documents to reach a specific man at the moments when his ability to question them was lowest. The method by which those documents reached Charles required tracing the physical movement of paperwork through the palace system. High-value authorization requests had been placed inside dense packages of routine administrative material, all assembled in sequences designed to make the dangerous documents invisible against institutional normalcy. Staff aligned with the Queen's household would arrive at the King's study during windows of reduced capacity, carrying the stacks with practiced gentleness. Their instruction was consistent. "These require attention today, sir. Nothing that cannot be handled quickly, so you may rest afterward." He had trusted them completely. And then there was the seal. A distinctive purple impression bearing Camilla's personal mark appeared on documents as they passed through her administrative office before reaching the King. William's analysts found it on every fraudulent special fund authorization without exception, applied between 24 and 48 hours before each document stack was delivered to a man whose condition on those dates was already established in the medical record. Someone had not merely failed to stop this. Someone had ensured it continued. The combined extraction across both channels exceeded £130 million across 5 years. William held that figure and everything beneath it, digitally documented and forensically mapped. But digital evidence carried a vulnerability he understood clearly. Original documents bearing Charles's compromised signature and Camilla's seal were physical objects that could cease to exist. So before the case moved forward, he built a second trap inside the first one. Within the Privy Purse office worked a woman named Margaret Thornton, appointed to her role with Camilla's personal facilitation. She was not corrupt. She was a true believer whose conviction that Camilla had been wronged by history made her entirely predictable. William's investigators arranged for Margaret to overhear 2 auditors discussing the investigation's final stage. The money trail was fully mapped. What remained was securing the physical originals from Archive B. Margaret absorbed every word. Within 6 hours, Camilla had been informed. She received the warning, dismissed her staff, and spent 2 hours in the kind of solitary calculation that reveals what a person values most when everything else falls away. She reached for a prepaid telephone and called Ali Hassan. He had served as her principal close protection officer for 15 years, had shielded her from every threat across every difficult period of her public life, and carried knowledge that made him irreplaceable. She told him what was required with the directness of someone accustomed to instructions being followed. Safe 4 in Archive B. The original authorizations had to be permanently removed from existence. Hassan understood immediately that this bore no relationship to protective work. He gave her no indication of hesitation, because by the time the call ended, he had already decided what he was actually going to do. He entered Buckingham Palace through a staff access point at 20 minutes to 2 in the morning, moved through corridors he knew precisely, bypassing patrol rotations and camera positions, and reached Safe 4 at 3 minutes past 2. He worked the lock for 15 minutes before it gave way. Inside a red portfolio lay 40 pages of original authorizations. Charles's signature on every one, unsteady and trembling. Beneath each signature, the purple seal. Hassan raised a lighter. Every light in the room ignited simultaneously. Footsteps arrived from multiple directions. A voice cut through the brightness with complete authority. "The portfolio does not move. Hands on your head." 5 officers from the Royalty Protection Group had been waiting in that room for 3 hours. Hassan raised his hands. Thompson listed the charges: unauthorized entry, attempted destruction of Crown documents, conspiracy to obstruct a royal investigation, and given the incendiary device he carried, offences extending into counter-terrorism statutes. Then he provided one additional detail. The prepaid telephone Camilla had used had been under GCHQ monitoring for 72 hours. Every word of her instruction had been captured in her own voice. Hassan had not come to carry out her instruction. He had come to verify the evidence was real before making the decision he had already reached. The testimony he provided across the following 6 hours dismantled what remained of the conspiracy more completely than any document could have accomplished. William sat across from him in a facility whose official designation did not appear in any public record, alongside Lord Justice Peyton. He played the GCHQ recording. The muscle along Hassan's jaw tightened once and did not release. Camilla had not requested concealment. She had specified annihilation, with no concern for his exposure and no contingency for his protection. William laid out the legal consequences without embellishment. 20 years minimum across aggregate charges, complete dissolution of pension entitlements, and every benefit tied to his decades of service. Then he placed the alternative on the table: full cooperation, reduced charging, protected status for his family, and complete testimony about the conspiracy's structure and Camilla's role at its center. When Hassan spoke, it was with the quietness of someone delivering a conclusion already reached before entering the room. The loyalty he had maintained had not been protecting someone in danger. It had been facilitating a criminal operation against a dying man who trusted the people surrounding him. That distinction, he said, was the only thing that had ever mattered to him. It was also the only thing that made what he was about to do possible. For 6 hours he described what Camilla had called the post-Charles security arrangement: a minimum of £100 million in independently controlled assets, accumulated before the king's death, and structured through her children in ways that would survive the transition of power. Charles's medical calendar had been accessed under the cover of diary coordination, and the information extracted had been used to identify the intervals when his capacity for scrutiny was most severely compromised. And across all of it, Hassan confirmed, Camilla had never expressed anything resembling guilt. What she had expressed was operational confidence. The illness was a scheduling condition to be managed. William arrived at the private study, carrying only a briefcase. Charles sat in a chair that seemed larger than before. The physical deterioration was visible, the transparency of his complexion, the way the dignity he had always carried seemed for the first time to cost him something to maintain. Camilla was present. When she saw William's face, she understood that whatever was in that briefcase was not something she could redirect. He had arrived as the person who was about to end everything she had built. He laid the documentation out in sequence: the financial mapping, the original authorizations, the forensic analysis pairing each document to the medical record confirming its signing date against treatment windows. He handed his father a single page, the £2.88 million transfer that had ended in a Jersey shell company. Charles held it with trembling hands and looked at a signature he could not remember producing. William played the final recording: Hassan's account, describing the fund's purpose, its construction, and the clinical detachment with which Camilla had discussed the exploitation of her husband's illness as an element of financial strategy. When it ended, Charles sat without moving. When he finally spoke, the question was barely audible. He asked why. He had placed everything he had in defending her right to exist beside him, and she had looked at what was killing him and treated it as a resource. Camilla attempted several beginnings, none completed. She reached for William's feelings about his mother as an explanation for the investigation. She tried to characterize the arrangements as reasonable preparation for an uncertain future. William answered without elevation in his voice. She had possessed Charles's complete trust and she had consumed it. Charles closed his eyes and said nothing more to her. William placed a sealed legal instrument on the surface between them. The conditions it contained were absolute: departure from the estate within 15 minutes, relocation to a property in the northern Scottish Highlands, public funds reduced to a supervised stipend, the title of Queen Consort retained in designation only, stripped of every ceremonial function and public engagement, contact with Charles prohibited across every channel, her children's engagement with the Crown conditioned entirely on continued cooperation with restitution proceedings. Camilla cited her rights. William described the alternative: full criminal prosecution under fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse statutes, her children publicly charged, a trial whose global visibility would be measured in years. The silence that followed was complete. She spoke one word. 2 officers entered and accompanied her to a vehicle bearing no royal identification. She took nothing but the clothes she was wearing. Each step through the rooms she had inhabited, as the most senior woman in the British royal structure, moved her further from something she would never return to. The vehicle passed through the gate and was gone. William went back to his father. Charles had not moved. Something had passed through the room with her departure, a combination of devastation and reluctant relief. William rested a hand on his shoulder and told him that what had been done to him was real, and that what surrounded him now was also real. Charles asked what came after this. William told him the immediate crisis had been resolved, but the work of what followed was longer and harder. Institutional structures that had permitted this required examination. The Crown had to demonstrate, not merely state, that accountability applied to everyone within its walls. Charles listened and offered the thing he had always understood most deeply. He said that discipline must never become indistinguishable from the coldness that makes institutions lose the human qualities that justify their existence. William's greatest test as a future king would be ensuring that what was done in the name of accountability did not hollow out the warmth that gave the crown its meaning. Kate arrived, took Charles's hand and told him simply that he was surrounded by people who valued him for who he was. He produced a small, genuine smile. As William and Kate moved toward the door, he stopped once and looked back. His father was still visible in the grey morning light. Kate took his hand. They drove away in silence. The question that no official statement will ever address is how this was permitted to develop at all. The monarchy has endured abdications, constitutional crises, and the long erosion of institutional relevance across generations. But a conspiracy constructed inside the household of a king by the person closest to him, executed against his illness with professional precision, is something categorically different from any of those tests. Can the institution rebuild the trust that was dismantled in those rooms? And what does it mean for a man in the final passage of his life to understand that the years he considered most intimate were also the years he was most systematically exploited? These are the questions that will define the character of everything the British Crown becomes under the man who answered them before he had the title to do so. We want to hear from you. Do you believe William handled this the way it needed to be handled? And can a monarchy rebuild the depth of trust that was lost in those rooms? Leave your thoughts below, because every single one matters to us.